The levers of the party are run by some very, very ruthless people. They really like being horrible to each other. And I can see that continuing in one way or another because it is about power ultimately. And that is why, having seen what I saw inside, I don't think we're going to get the change that we need in this country.
You know, the way that's being characterised is not my understanding. I am close friends with my colleagues in the former Shadow Cabinet who are now getting on with running the country.
Let's chuck the Tories into this mix. Paul.
Just as the result came through, there was a proper intake of breath of, right, now it's going to be Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick, and the Tories in front of us just head in hands. I looked over to the Labour MPs and they were chuckling and one of them winked at me.
Given the track record of the last 100 days, are you expecting much better in the next 100? Hello and welcome to the Political Forecast. So, how badly have Keir Starmer's first 100 days gone, and could the next 100 actually be worse? With me to discuss whether the Prime Minister can seize the initiative after months of stories about freebies, warring advisors and gloomy economic forecasts, I'm joined by Thangam Debbonaire, who was set to be a leading cabinet minister in Sir Keir's government before she lost her seat in a shock result at the election, Faiza Shaheen, who was a rising star in the Labour Party before a public spat led to her running as an independent in July, and our very own senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara. Paul, I'm going to ask you to set the scene first. How bad have the last 100 days been, and what's it look like for the next?
It's not been great. Do you know, I was at the first press conference Keir Starmer did on the Saturday after winning the election, and he walked in, they changed the room that he's doing the press conferences in now. They went back to the room that Tony Blair used to use. He walked out and he looked really prime ministerial. And it was almost like a collective, you could see all the journalists either side going like, okay, this is a real change from what we've had before. We're not gonna have the soap opera. And then since then, we've had 3 months of quite a bit of soap opera. So it started with two-child benefit cap. That feels like a million years ago now.
Big rebellion.
Then we had the riots over the summer.
Which he did very well on.
Which he did well on, but it's not an ideal start. But then there were things that are of their own making. So winter fuel payments, taking that away from thousands of pensioners, that's going to rumble on and on and on. We've had one or two donations that raised some eyebrows, like 20 grand's worth of suits and 2 grand's worth of glasses and Taylor Swift concerts. And those stories keep on drip feeding. And at no point did they really get on top of the messaging and shutting that story down or addressing it properly. And now just this weekend, we've had Sue Gray, who was like this totemic figure in Downing Street, finally leaving. So it hasn't been the ideal start. It's not been the start that Keir or anyone in Downing Street would have wanted. So, well, will the next 100 days be any better? And you're looking at the next 100 days and you've got, well, let's see what carries on in the Middle East. At the very least, if things keep on escalating as they have been, are oil prices going to start rising? How's that going to impact the economy? We've got an election in the US. And then, of course, we've got our very own budget, which has taken quite a long time to get around to. It's going to be about 116 days since getting into office where he sets the tone of what's going to happen. The problem is we're leaving it that long is that everyone's building up a lot of expectations in what comes in this budget. And there is a chance that he might not meet those expectations and then things could go even worse.
Faiza Shaheen, given the track record of the last 100 days, are you expecting much better in the next 100?
Well, I would say that the budget is really critical. I think the first 100 days, as has been outlined there, have been, drip, drip, drip of a lot of bad news. And you can see it in terms of the popularity of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. I just saw that they're just 1 point ahead of the Tories now, which is quite something.
And he personally is now more unpopular than Nigel Farage. Is that the kind of leader you wanted in power?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, I think the Labour Party, this is one thing, the Labour Party used to be a broad church. And I think one of the things that I would add to is just clearly the last 100 days, even with a huge majority, the treatment of those on the left just shows that this is a political project very much driven from one faction of the Labour Party. It's very top down. And now with Morgan McSweeney becoming the chief of staff, so certainly that I assume that will continue. I think, but again, the problem is that we talk a lot about the internal politics, which has certainly looked bad, I think, with the internal briefings against each other. But for everyone out there, we really need what they promised us, which is change. And we haven't seen that come forward. And that's the thing that really is upsetting the public. And so the budget is critical, seeing actually a vision for that change, some actually substantive policies in place. And, from what has come, even some of the good stuff, public ownership of trains and the renters bill and some stuff that you can look at and say that could be good, right? Yeah, and the bill on employment rights as well, that it's been shadowed by those things. And it's also, the scale of it has been quite small compared to the change that is needed.
Right. Well, Thangam Debbonaire, let me bring you in here because you were part of that change project. It's been bitterly overshadowed, as Faiza says, and not as big as it could have been.
So obviously I'm frustrated that things that are great, and I do think are actually quite big and significant, are not cutting through. I think that Ed Miliband, for instance, as our Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero, has done amazing work. I mean, it's transformational to introduce Great British Energy Bill, but also to end the effective ban on onshore wind. And Faiza mentioned the renationalising of the trains. That's a big deal. Lou Haig's sorting out the buses as well as the trains. I think she's the Transport Secretary. I think that anybody who, whichever way you get to work, over the last sort of 10 years, you've known that whether you come in by road, rail or bus, that Britain is breaking. And people felt that Britain is breaking. And I think people are also realistic about the fact that when you've had that much damage over that long, it's going to take a while to sort out.
You've picked out, you sort of share you have a similar pick of what's been the sort of triumphs of the last 100 days. But let's dive into the budget because, you're an economist. What's the strategy here? How transformational does this budget need to be? Is it taxing the rich till the pips squeak?
Well, we're not going to get that. I think essentially
you'd like that, but we're not going to get it.
I think what we'll see from Rachel Reeves is that there's been some learning about the lack of popularity of this government, and we're hearing about changing fiscal rules, and she's really
to allow more borrowing.
Right, to allow more borrowing because they're not going to be able to deliver change without more money. Some work that some of my colleagues are doing that hopefully will get through in the budget around equalising capital gains tax with income tax. Some of that might happen, and that will be much needed. But I think the big problem again is the scale of change needed. I actually agree with the analysis that they've walked into this terrible situation with the Conservatives. And they've actually painted themselves into a corner, not just in terms of, so far, not the big vision policy piece on the economics, which is, they talk about growth, but how, but also in terms of the narrative, because actually all we've heard from Rachel Reeve since becoming Chancellor and before is the narrative of like debt and austerity, talking down the economy. They've really painted themselves into this corner and made it difficult for them to deliver on the change.
But you talk about big transformational change. I mean, there are anecdotal stories. A lot of rich people are leaving the country because they fear what's coming in the budget. Is that
I don't think there's evidence to show that they are leaving the country. I do think
would it matter if they did?
I mean, of course, it matters if you feel like, if it's true that the wealthy are all leaving the country. I spent a lot of time in between the last election, this election, working with governments around the world, looking at policies that worked. And the thing that I really learned from that was that it's not just the technical policy change, it's actually the narrative and the story you tell. So for instance, governments around the world that had a solidarity tax. So they spoke about wealth taxes, but they didn't just do it taxing the rich. They said, this is a critical moment. We need to all put in, this is what the rich need to do in this moment. And so, but we don't hear any of that from this government. They're so timid on making the argument, and that is going to really get in the way of change.
Do you think Rachel Reeves is going to pull her punches in the budget?
I think...
Too timid?
I don't see Rachel Reeves as timid, and I also heard a lot from Rachel, but also from Johnny Reynolds, who's now the business secretary, and also from Ed Miliband in particular on energy, about investing for growth. Now, I think we're going to hear more over the next few weeks. I know people are probably really eager to hear what that's going to look like, but I think what matters is offering the stability that this government does offer in comparison with the last 14 years.
So the average good to take their time over the budget, even though there's been this massive news vacuum?
I think it mattered hugely to make sure that the Office for Budget Responsibility was able to do the checking of the figures in a way which Liz Truss did not allow, because we know what happened then. The economy crashed, the pound tanked while we were sitting in the chamber watching Kwasi Kwarteng, pointing at our phones going, please stop talking. And people's mortgages went up then, and they still have not recovered. Now that really matters to show that sort of responsibility. People need to see this as a government who's going to be responsible with their money.
You say about responsibility though, right? But a year ago, last November, I remember Rachel Reeve saying, look, some governments might fiddle the figures or change the rules or do whatever to suddenly drum up another couple of billion quid. I'm not going to do that. That's what she told.
Yeah.
That's what she
But
told
that is
the world.
essentially
And now
what
the
she's
messaging that's coming out now is, we might be able to fiddle things just a little bit.
I wouldn't characterise it that way. I would characterise it as a responsible politician coming into government, into probably one of the most responsible positions there is, and saying, look, having looked at what we've got and having surveyed the landscape, we are going to need to make sure that the investment that we need in order to grow the economy is clear and that we know how to account for it. What you will see from Rachel Reeves, whenever she spends anything at all, she will be able to account from where it's come from and what its purpose is.
Faiza.
And I think that's worth honing the story of.
I think, I'm sorry, but I think that's a bit disingenuous in the sense that she knew that, she would come in and there would be this need for investment, and the change that she's making, the change she's making to the fiscal rule, we could see that coming. So I think, the idea that she wasn't going to fiddle the figures and then now is changing the rules. And I think it's I think it's a good thing because actually, economists on the left have been saying for a while that we should think about debt differently and think about.
So it's a good thing.
So it's a good thing, but she's going to get hounded because she said something different. When you promise change and then come in and then, start off in this way that is very timid and quiet and taking a long time.
Renationalising the trains is timid?
It really sends a signal. The optics have not been good so far. And I think, absolutely agree with public ownership of the trains, but again, that's been really overshadowed. And so I think, what Labour Party can do now, and I say the Labour Party, but it's essentially the front bench, but what can they do now in terms of stopping the infighting, stopping with the freebies and actually focusing on policies that are going to change this country for the better.
Indeed, they have. And I think one of your criticisms earlier on was that it was about the narrative, the substance, and you've actually given several examples of things you like. The substance is good. The substance is transformational. I think the biggest criticism you guys have been able to come up with so far is that the story doesn't look good. And if that's the case, that's the right way around.
I mean, that's important.
It is important, but there isn't an
election
anytime soon. And what matters at the moment is doing the things that are going to change our country for good, for the better.
Coming for your capital gains and your pension savings.
I'm not going to predict what Rachel's
going to do. No, come on. But if she does that, she's left herself very little room for manoeuvre because of the promises on income tax.
I think the worst that can be said about a politician is that they survey the landscape and they realise that they're going to need to change their mind on something. That's a mature politician, and I respect that. And you did just say it was a good thing if she does. So I'm really happy if Rachel looks at the landscape and goes, we're not dealing with what we thought we were going to deal with, and now I'm going to do this. That's a good thing. That's a mature politician. At work, unlike Kwasi Kwarteng and on numerous other Tory chancellors.
Well, I think that
who raided the capital budgets to pay for day-to-day spending, which Rachel will not be doing.
I just think that ultimately we're not going to see the change that we want to see because of the fact that we're not going bold on some of these big economic policies. And I think
we're going bold enough to have some business people or entrepreneurs heading for the exit.
This is the issue, right? She's basically said we're going to be for businesses and we're going to be for working people. And you hear this all the time. Right. But actually now that everyone gets annoyed, and we were talking about it, so even when it comes down to Gaza.
Very happy with the employment bill.
Well, actually, I've heard a mixed picture on that. And I worked with trade unions for a while, and I've heard a mixed picture on that. They think they've had some, that essentially they've, some things like, of course, it's a low bar, 0-hour contracts, but and we absolutely should end those. But they didn't get everything that they wanted, and they're not fully happy. And businesses are also not happy. So this is a problem for them. It's a political.
Isn't that called government as well?
It's called grown-up government. They've consulted with the trade unions. They've consulted with businesses, and there is now more consultation to get the detail right. And I think that's a grown-up government doing it how it's supposed to be.
I can see why you're making this argument, but I guess it is politics at the end of the day. It is how it's perceived outside, and it's who your cheerleaders are.
And Keir's not very good at politics, nor was Sue Gray, and that's why she's gone, and Morgan McSweeney's in the helm.
Keir is focused. For once, we've got a Prime Minister that's focused on the long term, who is focused on taking the right steps.
Less popular than Nigel
Farage. I want a Prime Minister who actually cares more about what's good for the country than anything else, and that's who Keir Starmer is.
Country doesn't care for him, though, according to the polls.
And that's what we've got in Keir Starmer, is someone who's actually going to be careful with your money. Yes, I can, because I believe it.
But then actually, when you look at the evidence and what people are seeing on these freebies and the way he reacted, I think that's really, that opinion is really far from what people think in the street.
I haven't asked my opinion, Faiza, and that's what I'm giving.
I got one question. No, I got one question this though. Okay, look, Keir's in it for the long term.
Yes.
You back him. Terrific.
I do.
But was there even a little bit of you in the last couple of weeks that was looking at all the freebie stories and going, oh God, 20 grand on suits?
I'll tell you what, should we talk about how many freebies the Tories took? It's just blatant
and you hammered
hypocrisy.
him, and you hammered him as well. And we all did all the stories on it.
Hypocrisy. Keir has declared absolutely everything in the proper manner.
Paul, just is the Downing Street dysfunction fixed? Just give us the picture on that.
If you talk to senior people in Downing Street at the moment, they say, Sue Gray was quite a polarising
The Chief of Staff.
figure, former Chief of Staff. She was quite a polarising figure. Even in the days fresh after the election, there were quite a few people who had worked tirelessly for years for the party that weren't given jobs. Some of them not given jobs at all, some of them not given jobs straight away and had to wait for it. A lot of them put that down to Sue Gray. Talking to special advisors, quite a few of them are very happy about the change of personnel.
With Morgan McSweeney now replacing.
I often think back to a conversation I had with just the day after the election when the Labour MP called me and said, the thing is, and this is what I saw as well in compared to the Corbyn years, is that the levers of the party are run by some very, very ruthless people. And they really like being horrible to each other. And I just don't, and I can see that continuing in one way or another because it is about power ultimately for these people. It's not about a vision for change.
Yeah, but that ruthlessness, obviously very bad for you personally, but I mean, he got a stonking majority. It worked. He purged the left.
The
and
Tory
Labour
just
won
completely collapsed, right? And I'm not saying, of course, there's things that you have to do in politics that, I'm quite wise to that. But I do think it was because the Tories collapsed as well, and that's often taken out of the equation. But
to win that
I
landslide.
I worry that the internal machinations and fighting will continue just because there are a lot of people trying to build their fiefdoms in this moment. And you speak a lot about Ed Miliband, who I think is great and doing good work, but he's not interested in all of that, which is why he's just focused on his policies, whereas a lot of them are going to struggle with that and are, thinking already, this is politics. They're already thinking already, what comes after Starmer? Where can I position myself? How can I make a name for myself? And that becomes about themselves and their own power. And that is why ultimately, having seen what I saw inside, I don't think we're going to get the change that we need in this country.
That's interesting that, the way that's being characterised is not my understanding. I am close friends with my colleagues in the former shadow cabinet, as I occasionally still call it, because that's what I was in, who are now getting on with running the country. It's a very, very big job. Being a Secretary of State or a minister is a big job. And the ministers that I'm in touch with, they are focused absolutely 100% on trying to transform the country, mend the damage of the last 14 years and try and change things for people, which is what we actually came into government to do. And I'm really proud of them.
Yeah, but when we spoke in July, soon after you lost your seat, you talked about the need for more diversity in the team around Keir Starmer. And now Morgan McSweeney, he's the man, isn't he?
So let's think about what we've got here. We've got Jill Cuthbertson, who's one of the deputies, and Vidya Alexon, who's also one of the deputies, who are incredibly strong, powerful women.
Yeah,
I've seen them
the
operational. I think in the front there, in the cabinet, you've got Rachel Reeves, who's in charge of your money.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the team around Keir in Downing Street.
The team around Keir is the cabinet. They're who counts in the end. The politicians decide, advisors advise.
Is that
and the
true,
people
Paul?
the people around Keir also include Steph Driver, who's one of the leading people in the comms team, and Sophie and Jazz, who did an amazing job on the comms that did help us win the election. We've got incredible women both in front of the camera and behind the camera. I think there are incredible women in the sisterhood that I've seen in the women in the Labour Party as chair of the Labour Women's Network, where we genuinely welcome all shades of red, and you are very welcome. Faiza, if you rejoin the Labour Party, if you want,
clearly not. And I didn't get any solidarity from women. Right. Even as a new mum, I didn't.
I am sorry to hear that, but I have to say, in the Labour Women's Network, what I found is incredible support and solidarity between the Labour women. And
if you have the same political project, if you're in the part of that political project.
We have a phrase in the Labour Women's Network, which is all shades of red. And Labour Women's Network graduates, including me,
well, obviously not.
They included me. Well, I wasn't part of any of that decision making, Faiza, and I don't know what happened.
Let's chuck the Tories into this mix. Paul, set up when we're going to get a new leader and who we think that's going to be.
A couple of weeks' time. Do you know, so last night when the announcement came through who the final two, I was in Portcullis House. I was sat having a cup of tea with a senior Tory MP, and there were a couple of Labour MPs to the side of me. And just as the result came through, there was a proper intake of breath of, right, now it's going to be Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick. And the Tories in front of me, just head in hands, shaking their heads. I looked over to the Labour MPs I knew, and they were chuckling, and one of them winked at me.
You see, and I, this is where I'm at the risk of being controversial here. I'm going to disagree with the Labour friends that winked at you, because honestly, a strong government needs a strong opposition. You are a better government when you have a good opposition that's scrutinising your every move and exposing where there might be problems. I also think that it's quite telling about the Tory party that there was one candidate left in the last three who said we need to show people that we're normal. And the Tory MPs, whoever they were that you were having tea with, I don't know who they were, but the Tory MPs voted to boot him out, the one that said, let's try and look more normal. That says something really frightening about the current Tory party, the parliamentary party. It's weird.
For balance,
really weird.
For balance, I would argue that Kemi's team and Robert Jenrick's team would both say that their candidate is normal also.
They were saying that, yes. Well, we'll all judge with our own eyes, won't we? It's not normal to go around and say that maternity pay is too much.
She also said that her comments were taken out of context.
She did say that, didn't she? Bless her.
I like this fact-checking role that you're doing, Paul.
Absolutely.
But Thangam, which is the scariest of those two for Labour?
Well, the scariest for the country is both of them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For Labour.
But I think, I genuinely think that you need someone who's going to be able to scrutinise the Labour Party, the Labour government properly.
That's why it's all fallen apart in the last 100 days.
Labour Party.
You didn't have a good enough leader of the opposition.
I personally don't think it's fallen apart. The way the country is being run efficiently and with stability. And
Faiza, who do you think poses the biggest threat to Labour of those two, the final two, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick?
I just have to say that I agree that you need to have that strong opposition. And whilst, the glee thing from Labour and Lib Dems, I personally find really worrying as well, because these are people that come out with very strong anti-immigrant views and in the current climate, and especially after the summer we've had with the riots, and unfortunately also the sense that Labour is not going to stick up for those issues. I have senior friends at the Home Office telling me that straight after those horrible riots, Islamophobic, racist riots, that they were told internally that we need to focus on more deportations. Yeah, so whoever for the Labour Party, I think both of them, I guess Kemi Badenoch says more crazy things, so I suppose that it seems that she says more crazy things, but who knows? But I just think I genuinely am worried for that, how that plays out in terms of the immigration narrative in this country.
Hanging over all of this, of course, is the conflict in Gaza.
Yeah.
That was a big reason why you got axed as a Labour candidate, because you tweeted about Gaza. What are you hearing from the new government that makes you optimistic, and what do you want in the next 100 days? Because they have ended some arms exports to Israel, haven't they? You want that to go further in the next 100 days?
Absolutely. It's just spread, hasn't it? It's not just Gaza. My friends in Beirut. It's so distressing. And I think sometimes in this conversation we forget that human impact, living in fear. My friend's daughter is just she's got so much trauma now from hearing these planes constantly flying over their flat. And I'm not hopeful, I'm afraid, from this government. I think the 30 licenses was piecemeal. It's kind of admitting that there's a human rights issue here. The 30 licenses that were suspended, just a tiny number compared to what should be. I think ending arms sales, especially as Netanyahu is expanding this war. I think the statements made on commitment to supporting Israel, it's almost as if that's just going to go on regardless of what Netanyahu does next, which is, how many more people need to die, with 40,000 plus, mainly children and women. I just don't see that humanity. He's meant to be, Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer. It's really upsetting. And I think that's, obviously was a really gutting for a lot of people and a lot of reasons why they lost some elements of the progressive vote and Muslim vote in the election. And that's definitely, there's still a lot of anger in that community.
I think one of the things that I find really distasteful is this feeling that the Labour Party has been blamed for the actions of what's going on in the Middle East, which it clearly is not. But I have to say, I think the human scale of the suffering we have to absorb wherever we are on the political spectrum. We have to absorb that simply doing it's Gaza's suffering has been for many, many years. Gaza has been campaigning, and the suffering of the people in the occupied territories in the West Bank, that's also there, but so too is the suffering of the Jewish people from the northern part of Israel, who presumably didn't want that to happen either. In Lebanon, as Faiza said, quite rightly, this war is spilling out of control.
So wouldn't you expect to hear this from Keir Starmer a little bit more robustly?
I have heard Keir being extremely robust, and I think it's distasteful to
When?
make it about Keir. Keir has called for a ceasefire. I voted for a ceasefire twice under Keir Starmer. Keir has called for a ceasefire many times.
Very slow to do that.
And no, we did it at exactly the same day as the Scottish National Party motion, actually.
Well, Jess Phillips had to quit the front bench, didn't she, over the ceasefire vote?
But I did vote for a ceasefire that day. Now, what matters to me
we
is that neither of those things, whichever ceasefire motion we voted for, and by the way, the second one we got through Parliament unanimously, did it make any difference to the actions of Hamas? Did it make any difference to the actions of Netanyahu? No, it did not. I don't think Netanyahu tuned in February when we got a unanimous motion through Parliament. I don't think he tuned in and went, OK, that's it. And I find it extraordinary that anybody thinks that yelling at the Labour Party is helping people in Palestine, because it is not. And it's not
empty gesture politics, Faiza.
It's not helping people in Lebanon. And I find it really extraordinary that people would think it does.
It's really interesting to hear you explain that in the way as if us having a go at our own government is pointless in this situation, or as if like it doesn't go anywhere. Because I can tell you, having worked with many UN ambassadors over the last few years, that actually the UK taking a strong position and voting, actually they've abstained on lots of votes in the UN, they voted with the US, and actually banning all arms sales, especially as things have escalated, would send a really important message to the world, a really important message to Israel and Netanyahu in particular, and an important message as well to the US, who,
you think
very
the US
slow
is
to
going to take messages from the UK?
Well, I think
the UK, the total proportion of arms sales to Israel by the UK is tiny.
Well,
it is minute.
No, it isolates the US to being like the only one of the few countries still supporting.
I think they're fairly confident being their own country.
No, I'm sure they are. But the point is
they're treading water, waiting to see who's going to win the presidential election.
But I don't know. So what would you tell people to do?
It was a Tory government last November when I got pasted. Not the Tories in my neighbourhood. It was me that got pasted, even though I'd voted for a ceasefire on the exact same day as the motion.
From Labour.
I voted for a ceasefire, Faiza. I'm just telling you. I just told you.
Okay, but
everybody did. It was the Labour position. It was a Labour motion that got through unanimously in February. Did anybody take any notice? No, they did not. And I don't think it's funny. I don't think it's okay.
I don't think it's funny either.
You're laughing.
I don't think it's funny either. I'm just smiling because it's just ignoring a whole part of what happened.
No, I'm not ignoring it.
You can't paint over that early period when we heard Keir Starmer going on TV saying that Israel has the right.
The Prime Minister. Did you hear Rishi Sunak go on TV? Why didn't you call for Rishi Sunak to say something? Nobody did. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. They attacked the Labour Party.
But you expect more from the Labour government. And,
oh, dear Lord, we weren't in government.
Well, we've had lots of different opinions in the past half hour. I just wanted to end by asking you both, because for different reasons, you're not in the involved in this new government. Are you pleased that you're out of it, Faiza, in your heart of hearts?
Yeah, I think the things that have happened over the last 100 days, and, already, that's why I was kicked out, because internally I was also raising my concerns about Gaza policy, etc. It's just something that I can't go along with. And I always used to say to people, when people used to say, about you, why are you still in the Labour Party? I'd be like, but it's a broad church and I support that, but it's not that anymore. And I think that is really concerning. And so, I just think there isn't less that I'm pleased to be out of it, and more that there isn't space for someone like me in the Labour Party now. And they would have just made my life a misery. And so, in that way, I have a bit more time with my baby and just to be happy.
Is there a new party afoot, though, in the future? Would you be part of a different?
But, it's important to me that that's why I try and be balanced in these things. And I think there's some good stuff that Labour Party could do. And we need that change. I'm raising my son here. And I hope that happens. But certainly if the Labour government fails, then we do need political forces from the left to push them to be more progressive.
Right. Thangam, are you gutted not to be round the cabinet table? Have you come to terms with that, or actually looking
at the freebies? You could have had a field day. You could have gone to Taylor Swift loads.
I haven't checked your register, actually.
I thought to win, you check away. Mine's really boring. The most exciting thing you will find is Madonna tickets last year, but that's literally it. So, no, seriously, I fought to win, obviously, and I prepared to win, but I also campaigned for a Labour government, and that's why I went into politics, was for a Labour government. Me being in it or not in it wasn't the main thing for me. I'm now in the fortunate position for me of having had a bit of time to have a bit of a rest, of still being able to work with cultural organisations as I would have done, but in a different way. And I, for
Losing
instance, I've just got back. The marbles. So yes, I've just got back from Athens. See what you did there? Because the Parthenon marbles, there's been a whole campaign for many, many years to reunite them, and I'm pleased to say that's one of the things I've been able to do, because I'm not the culture secretary, is help be part of the Parthenon project, but also because I was the shadow culture secretary, was to be able to set the policy direction so that there is a route for reunification. And I was in Athens last week and watched this space. I'm really, really hopeful that we'll see them reunified very soon.
Very soon?
I think they need to be.
Within
weeks,
there's a space
in the Acropolis for them. And
I tell you what, within the next 100 days, whatever the Labour government does, are we going to see the marbles handed back to Athens?
There are many moving parts in this discussion and this deal, Cathy, but there is a way of doing it. And I'm pleased to say that I've been fortunate enough to be able to play my part. And it doesn't hurt to have been in Athens for the first time, which was lovely.
It's very nice this time of year. Faiza Shaheen, Thangam Debbonaire, Paul McNamara, thank you all very much. That is it for this edition of the Political Forecast. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.